Hi, good evening and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. I'm Sarah with South Carolina Women in Leadership, and we're going to give some other folks just a few minutes to get logged in, and we'll get started in just a couple minutes. So as everyone is first entering, we would love to know where you're signing in from today, and if you would hover over your screen, you're going to get a bar at the bottom, a toolbar at the bottom that has a chat function. I can see Eleanor already let us know that she's in Columbia. If you click on the chat icon on your toolbar and then type a message, and just make sure that you select everyone if you want your message to go to everyone that's joining us tonight. And if at any point in the evening that you want to contact one of the presenters or someone individually, you can also select their name individually. So let us know where you're signing in from. Melissa's in Greenville. I should do mine. I am in, I guess, officially in Ridgeway. Eva's in Columbia as well. Jan, welcome. Thank you for being here tonight. I'm going to give it about one more minute just to let some other folks join us, make sure we're not missing everyone, and I'll take care of some housekeeping, and then we'll get started with the exciting part of the evening. And I will remind you that we do have both sound and audio enabled tonight. You guys already know the drill. I can see that everyone has themselves muted. So unless you're talking, if you would please keep yourselves muted just to avoid background noise. And if you need to step away for a moment, we certainly understand. Please feel free to stop your video if you'd like to. And both of those functions are available by hovering your mouse over your screen, and you'll get a toolbar at the bottom. Mute and stop video are on the left side of your toolbar. So I think without further ado, let's get started. I'm sure we'll have a few more folks joining us, but we can get all the housekeeping out of the way and get to the fun part of listening to interview clips and having a discussion. So again, welcome everyone to this month's South Carolina Women in Leadership Monthly Book Club. This month, rather than reading a book, we listen to a collection of oral stories from women in South Carolina from across the decades. I'm Sarah Ballard with South Carolina Women in Leadership, and we welcome you here tonight. We are really excited about listening to these oral stories from women across these 4 decades and talk about how things have changed for women in the past 4 decades, what issues are similar to those faced by women in the 1970s, how these women were influenced and shaped by their family experiences, and in what ways do these women provide a voice in their various careers. If you're not familiar with South Carolina Women in Leadership, we are a multi-partisan group of women working together across differences to move South Carolina forward by informing, inspiring, and involving women in leadership. Today is a massive movement for social justice sweeps the country. Our mission is more important than ever. We believe that as talented women with diverse and inclusive backgrounds step up to lead and to govern, gender and racial equality as well as community equity will at last become a reality. We have Eleanor today with us today from the South Carolina Will team, and she's going to help with tech support. So if you have trouble with anything, feel free to chat her individually. She's great with settings. If you've got problems with audio or echoes or things like that, feel free to get in touch with her and let her know. We also encourage you to get to know your fellow attendees, so feel free to ask questions, make comments all throughout our time this evening. You're welcome to give us a signal like a raised hand or chime in if you're able to. Or if you prefer, you can pose a question or make a comment in the chat. And I'll be watching the chat, and I'll also be trying to watch all of you. I know sometimes when we get rolling, it's hard to get a word in edgewise, so I will try to politely interject for you and let you have a chance to bring up whatever your thoughts or questions are. And again, just so everyone knows, to access the chat, hover your mouse over your screen. You're going to get a toolbar at the bottom. Just click on the chat, and a window will open where you can type your message in. And if you want it to go to everyone, just make sure you select everyone from the drop-down menu. And if you'd like it to go to one individual, you can select their name individually. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our presenter. We are very excited to welcome Andrea L'Hommedieu as our presenter tonight. She's the director of the Department of Oral History at the University of South Carolina. She's a librarian and an oral historian, and she's been serving in the field for more than 25 years. Her work on the Women's History Project, Gathering the Stories of Southern Women, is ongoing. She's also very busy documenting the experiences of COVID-19 from a wealth of perspectives, the Black Lives Matter movement, and is currently teaching an oral history service learning course on the 2020 election. Andrea's work has garnered 4 national awards for outstanding use of oral history, most recently in 2019 for her collaboration with USC honor students exploring the contributions of South Carolina veterans. So the theme of our discussion tonight is going to be sharing the background on the women that we're featuring, as well as the audio clips from the selected interviews. And obviously some of the interviews were very long, so we're just going to do short little clips. And we hope that you all had the opportunity to listen to the interviews ahead of time. And then Andrea will be facilitating an interactive discussion as we explore leadership roles and civic engagement across several decades. We've chosen 3 interviews from the 1977 International Women's Year collection and 3 interviews from her current project, Second Wave of the Women's Movement in South Carolina. So for almost 40 years, the interviews from 1977 have largely gone unheard, but that's beginning to change. The Department of Oral History, University Libraries, University of South Carolina have created this online exhibit to allow full and free access to both the sound recordings and transcripts of these interviews. The Second Wave of the Women's Movement collection brings together interviews with South Carolina women who navigated society domestically, politically, educationally, religiously, professionally, medically, and financially, most notably during the early 60s through the early 1990s. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Andrea. She's going to share her screen, and we're going to get started. Thank you again for joining us, and Andrea, we look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you. Let me go ahead and share my screen. And let me go back here. I wanted to share this first screen with all of you. It's just an incredible picture from the National Women's Conference in 1977. And you can see in the front row, Susan B. Anthony's great-grandniece is on the far left, and next to her is Bella Abzug. We have 3 young women in the center, and then on the far right is Betty Friedan. So that's an incredible picture, and it's one of those that sort of captures the feeling of the 1977 conference. What happened at that conference is Connie Myers, who was a professor here in South Carolina, got a grant to interview people at this national conference, as well as a state conference in South Carolina. And between those 2 conferences, she coordinated interviews with 700 people. And that collection is now at the University of South Carolina. And we have been busy for probably 6 or more years digging into those boxes of cassette tapes and digitizing them and painstakingly transcribing one after another, and built the website that you see here. That's just the face of the website. And I think we have over 200 of the interviews up online now. By the end of this week, there'll be 20 more up there. And so as we go along, we put more and more online, and hopefully someday we'll have all 700 up and available free for people to read, listen to, and do research and write about women's history. That's one of our big goals, is to create this huge wealth of information for other people to write about women's history. So that said, this is Constance Ashton Myers. She taught at the university here in South Carolina, and she was an early user of oral history as a methodology. So we have collections of hers on suffragists, early South Carolina suffragists, as well as the work she did in the late 70s on the National Women's Project. But so Connie gave us her collections, and we have those early suffragist interviews partially online, and there'll be more of those coming. But so she she organized this huge, about 30 women from all over the country to be interviews at this conference. And so the first three sound clips that we're going to listen to are from either the South Carolina or the national conference, but they're all South Carolina women. And so in Connie's case, we did a little clip about her marriage and some of her education. And I'm going to play that clip now.
My husband and I were married during World War II. Children, when the last one went off to kindergarten, I started back to school. So I'm a product of continuing education, but there was no such thing as a program called continuing education for women. I sailed right through. I always went full time, not part-time at all. I had 4 kids. I made A's. I graduated with high honors at California State University. I had to go where my husband was working. Near where? And I went to graduate school, Claremont in California, when he was transferred to Southern California.
So in that clip, we heard a little bit about her education, right? And also about, the marriage and the children came first, and then she pursued the education later, which in many ways is reversed today. That's an important thing for us to think about. And she had to go to school where her husband was working. So she traveled to where he was to get her education. I'm working on a whole project just about her because I think she's so important to capturing women's history in South Carolina. And this one is of Dorothy Franklin. Unfortunately, from these 1977 interviews, I sometimes can't find photographs to go with them, but I would love to find and have a photograph of Dorothy. Dorothy was from McCormick, South Carolina, and she was involved in the NAACP as a vice president. She was involved in the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, and she cared deeply about child care issues and voter registration and women's rights in general. And here's a clip from her interview.
My most interest is in child care, voter registration for one thing. I just love that. Plus, older women, senior citizens, and also the rights of women.
And you have a wide range of interests.
Right.
When did you first get involved or interested?
I got involved in 1969.
What caused it?
Well, there wasn't too many blacks on our registrar's book in the voter registration, right? So I started off with SCLC and campaigned from house to house.
So you can also see that those are a little bit harder to hear as well, because they come from 43 years ago, and we're taking these cassette tapes and digitizing them, and they're also happening at a conference. So you also have a lot of background noise, but we do the best we can to sort of elevate the sound. And you could hear the person interviewing Dorothy was Connie Myers. So there she is, also interviewing women. And this next featured person is Mary Jenkins. She was in Beaufort, South Carolina. She owned her own restaurant. This would be in 1977. And she was really interested at the conference about how women could be competitive in business circles. And the restaurant she owned was called Mary's Kitchen. And we have a little sound clip from her.
Organizations do you belong to?
I belong to the Women's Voters League, and I belong to the Memorial Hospital Auxiliary Fundraising Committee, And I also belong to the American Legion Auxiliary. I'm president of that. And there's other little programs that I work with, but I don't work with them as much as I work with these. And I find out that working with all these things, the interesting people that I meet and come in contact with every day and talk to, it kind of answers my questions that set the doubts that I had at ease, that women are really moving up and they can handle the job.
So you hear that one, the getting involved in organizations and the importance of that and the camaraderie. And also you can hear her talking about building self-confidence in feeling like women are capable in the business world. And this photo is from Barbara. Thank you. These are wonderful buttons from the women's movement that Barbara Rax has let us use graciously. And this is the Second Wave Women Project. This was started last year in 2019. We've been a little bit on pause because of the pandemic, but in the first year we have 49 interviews completed. USC honor students helped with some of those last fall. And, women interviewed span a broad timeline from the 1960s and 1992. That's broadly, right? So what we find is that women fall within that area in many different years and decades. So some of the people we interviewed might actually have been born in 1970, but they have some childhood experiences within the second wave. And then more of their adult experiences would be in the third wave. So we felt that starting to capture this now would be really important to continuing that women's history. And so the first person we're going to talk about, Jan Collins, I think she's here with us tonight, is a journalist. Her interview is full of these just beautiful recollections of her grandfather and learning about newspaper work from him and who he was. It's just a fabulous interview. She talks about feminist influences. And in this clip, I chose one about her asking for maternity leave at the Columbia Record newspaper.
At the Columbia Record at the time, Claudia Wilson and I were both pregnant at the same time. This was my second child, her first child. And so our babies were like a month apart. And so when we both went in together to ask for maternity leave because there was no such policy with the paper. And so our boss, who was very good to both of us, he gave it to us and it was paid. And I'm thinking it was 6 weeks or 8 weeks. And he told us, he said, well, I'm afraid you'll sue me if I don't. He told that to both Claudia and me. So I don't know, things were happening, that there were waves, I guess, being made. But I remember thinking that was kind of funny. But
so you hear those, those beginnings at that time of being given maternity leave. Of course, it's earned, and so I really like that clip talking about just that little bit of progress, right? So you get this feeling of there's progress being made. And then we have Michelle Logan-Owens, and I'm trying to remember how I found her or came in contact with her. She may have responded to being willing to be interviewed, but I went out and met with her at her workplace, and she talked about the whole idea of mentoring younger people. She does motivational speaking. She really talks about, how to be successful And I thought she would be a great one to talk to about how you go about doing that and what her philosophy is. And so I spoke to her, and one of the important things that she talked about is, you know, why she became a nurse to begin with. And this clip is about her memories of her mother taking care of her grandfather and how far they had to go to get medical service when he was sick.
You have your own little family circle with your parents, but then seeing that extended relationship, how she would always take my grandmother to her doctor's appointments, how she would always be that person who was there at the bedside asking questions. I didn't know it then, but she was her advocate. She didn't even know that. We didn't have those terms. Right. It was just what you did. And then I would see how much my mom just adored her father. And he was a carpenter and such a hardworking man. He became ill. He developed mesothelioma. And when you hear the commercials on TV now, you see all the lawyers, this is in the 80s. And because of the asbestos and all those things that he encountered, we didn't know it until many years later why this had happened with him. But I'll tell you that when he became ill, we had to travel to Colombia. And my mom, although she's one of 8 children, a lot of times that responsibility will fall to 1 or 2. And my mom was the one my grandfather looked to be there with him in the hospital. Because we didn't have cancer services in this community. We had to travel an hour to Colombia. And my mom would travel, she would bring us along. And during this very long illness, and especially in the summers, so she would take us over there and we would see the relationship she had with her dad, the things she would do to help him eat, to bathe him. You know, there was just things that she wanted to do to care for him and that he wanted her to do to care for him. But during this time,
And so that gives you, you know, an idea of the tight family circle, and you know the importance of access to medical care. So there's a lot of, and then she's gone into the health field and been very successful. And then our final panel here is Candy Waits, and many of you know Candy. You know, she's been deeply involved in politics in Richland County and South Carolina many, many years. You know, her father was Ed Yajan, the artist, and chair of the art department at USC for many years. And, you know, in her interview, she talks about the environment, children, ethics, you know, a whole range of issues. And so part of the clip that we use is about her emphasis of speaking on issues during her campaign and what it was like to be a woman when she was campaigning. And I'm going to play that for you now.
we campaigned door to door. Well, a couple of us did door to door throughout the entire county. Really worked hard. And when I campaigned, I introduced issues. Like we talked about consolidation. We talked about education. We talked about the arts. We talked about zoning. And I did it. The others would have these little cards that would say things like honorable, a good person, strong, you know, just nothing. And so because I began to talk about the issues, the press began to ask the other candidates, well, what do you think about law enforcement? What do you think? Do we need this? And so it broadened the whole process. But I remember so well, for you file in March, and the election is held in November. Well, because there had never been any women elected, I was very conscious of how I appeared, how I presented myself. So for all this March, April, May, June, July, September, November, I never wore long pants. Well, women didn't wear long pants in those days anyway that much, but you still had a pair of jeans that you wear on the weekend. when I would go to the grocery, I was always in a skirt, so that people wouldn't get this impression. Here she is. Who does she think she is? She's trying to do a man's job. Who's she? You know, look at her. She's got on pants.
And so you could just see how, you know, we've come so far from that time in that regard. But, you know, that I'm going to stop sharing my screen now. And, you know, we can talk about, you know, what, you know, this progress that we made, where do we have to go? You know, and you can see that so many things are the same and so many things are very different.
Yeah, and I just want to chime in and say thank you to all of the women who, and a lot of you are on here tonight. I think that we forget, some younger women forget how far things have come in 40 years. I mean, the idea of, you know, women not wearing pants, or this concept of it being a man's world and having to gain self-confidence in feeling like you are capable as a woman of accomplishing things. And we certainly have a long way to go, but we sure have come a long way. And I really appreciate it, and I know that other younger women really appreciate all the things that you did and all of the envelope that you pushed all those years when it wasn't always comfortable or easy. So thank you. And it was really moving to hear voices. I mentioned when we were getting ready to come on tonight that there really is a lot of value in just hearing a voice. It's nice to see people's faces, but I think that you can really listen to what people are saying in a different way when you just hear their voice, and to hear that across 40 years is really special and neat. So thank you. So I would love to hear.
This is Claudia. I'll tell a really quick, funny pants story.
Yeah.
I was new to the editorial board of the state. I always wore pantsuits. That was my armor. And one of the first short editorials I was assigned happened because I marched in my pantsuit into the executive editor's office to complain about an editorial he'd written chastising a woman lawyer who had been kicked out of court because she showed up for a court case in a pantsuit. And I went marching in and I said, "This is wrong." You know, look, I'm in a pantsuit. Women wear pantsuits. That judge was wrong to kick a competent attorney out because he didn't like her pantsuit. It was still professional. Rah, 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 rah. And he said, "Okay, you write it." And I did.
It seems inconceivable. I mean, you know, it just seems inconceivable that those sorts of things happened such a short time ago.
Well, you know, there's still so many ways to keep a woman under a thumb, you know, and having rules like African-American women and the restrictions on hair, how you can wear your hair, what's a professional look versus an unprofessional look, but that attitude is another example of, you know, trying to control.
Right, and you think of that. There's so many stories I've heard across these interviews about women who had to get permission or a signature to get a loan at a bank. Right, some of you may even remember that. I mean, you know, that was meant to hold us back as well.
This is Jan. Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes.
I can speak to that. One of the things that I think really started me into feminism is in the late 60s, and I was a reporter at the Ann Arbor News, and I was assigned to do an article about a young woman doctor who had just finished medical school, and she was starting up a practice, and she had to get her husband's signature so that she could get a loan for the practice. He was unemployed and she was a doctor, and she had to get his signature. I was so blown away by that. I could not believe it. I was like 22 maybe or something, and I wasn't aware of that. And that really started me thinking about feminism and women's rights and all, but I've never forgotten that because I was so amazed that she had to do that.
So Barbara had posed a question in the chat. A lot of people feel the pandemic is setting women back. Is there a way to take value from these stories to keep our momentum going? And there's something that resonated, Jan, in your interview. You mentioned that, and I think it was maybe when you were at Harvard and you were sitting in a class that you were auditing, and it dawning on you that you were out of diapers, and thinking about those kind of things. And I know that I do have 2 children as well, and there's always sort of this guilt. And I don't know if it's societal or if it's our family that puts us, or just as women, it's how we feel about taking care of our children, but always feeling like if you're doing one thing, that you're not doing something else that you should be doing. So if you're doing your career or your professional things, that you're not doing what you should for your family, or if you're doing for your family, you're not pushing yourself as much as you can in your career. So that's one thing that obviously is still the same over the years, and I'm not sure how we get over the hump on that.
Yeah, I think that never goes away. This guilt and trying to do it all. Now, somebody who said this, it might have been Ruth Bader Ginsburg, saying you can have it all, but just not at the same time. Which is nice to say, but sometimes you do have to do it at the same time. So I think that it's a very difficult problem, and I'm not sure it's gotten any better for example, my daughter and daughter-in-law than it was for me. Really.
Well, it's true. You can't do it all at the same time. You can't. That's why countries that provide daycare and parental leave have, when they look at surveys on happiness and satisfaction with family life, do much better because they have the support that both men and women need. And as long as we don't give that support, women aren't going to be going slowly crazy.
Right, and
I think, I think a big part of that too has to do with we do more professionally, but we still have to do the same at home that every woman before us did. Like, women keep making strides in our careers, but men aren't taking any more slack up at the house. So we still have to plan all the meals and coordinate everything and drive to soccer practice and run our business or, whatever. So I think feminism is trying to help that too, and make the balance instead of everything just shifting over to women.
So another thing that struck me, and it may have also been Jan's interview as well, talking about your difference in your experiences in the Midwest, in Michigan, versus in the South. And I'm from Ohio. We lived around different places, but my grandmothers were my grandmother helped my grandfather run his business. They were very much co-partners and equal, particularly for their time. They were born in the late teens and early 1920s, and they are Midwestern people from Ohio and West Virginia, and so I wonder, Barbara, you're from Michigan. I don't know if other people, Eleanor's from not from the South. Just kind of what your thoughts are on how things were different for you when you came to the South, and do you think that there are still differences between like the Midwest or other parts of the country and the South in terms of how women are treated?
Okay, this is Barbara. So my mother was a business person, and she was born in 1905. So it was a very unusual kind of circumstance. And my father ultimately became a disabled veteran. But, and frankly, she made almost all of the decisions because she was really managing the business that managed the family. But there was always this sort of peculiar thing that I see in the South oftentimes, that my mother was this very strong woman, but she appeared to defer all decisions to my father. So she would really have made the decision, and then she would say, well, see what your father thinks. And he would say, what'd your mother say, and that kind of stuff. But I find among many Southern women, or perhaps historically I have found among Southern women, that we have that kind of deference that women will often say, well, I'm going to find out what my husband thinks about that. And heaven forbid, when I first moved here and people would say, and no, I moved here 40 years ago, so it's a long time ago. But women would say, in making their voting choices, they would say, well, I'm going to vote however my husband tells me to. And I thought, why do we have privacy in the voting booth? And, education that teaches us to make good decisions about who the candidates are that we might want to elect. And then we just say, we're going to vote how somebody else does. I mean, I never heard a man say, I'm going to vote however my wife tells me to. Just saying.
Andy.
Chime in there. From differences that I've seen, I've only lived in South Carolina for starting my 5th year here. And I think some of the differences aren't necessarily south or north or wherever, but I've seen a lot of differences between, I grew up in kind of like a rural-ish community in Pennsylvania, and there aren't like huge differences between how gender norms were there and how they are in some of the communities here. But some of the biggest differences I've seen are when I live in cities versus when I live in rural areas, or also like in university towns. There was a section in Candy's interview about when there are lots of women in a place, like women then start to take on leadership roles, and with more and more women, I mean way more women going to college and getting graduate degrees, more women than men at this point. Basically all leadership roles are filled by women at the university, like in terms of like at the student level. And so that's like the biggest difference that I've seen. It's not necessarily regional, but location within the state.
Barbara Rax mentioned, women sort of saying that they're deferring to their husbands, or going to do what their husband tells them to do. And I thought it was also interesting, Candy's strategy of sort of being funny or indirect in calling men out on things, which was, kind of a way for her to not be adversarial, and to use the norms of the time to her advantage. If they made a comment about being distracted by someone's pretty dress, then, she would kind of try to point out, oh, well, can I vote because I was distracted by someone's, handsome seersucker suit, or, just kind of pointing out how silly some of the things that they were saying in a way that wasn't confrontational. So I think that it was just a really neat way to say that, you can do the right thing or point things out, but you don't always have to be adversarial about the way that you do it, which is certainly something that I'm not always very good at, stepping back in that way.
All right, you just reminded me of something. 1,000 years ago when I was in the House, there's always a doctor of the day. And so one day, the doctor of the day was a woman. And whoever district this person lives in would introduce the doctor of the day. And so the guy got up there and he said, oh, you're all going to want to go to the doctor today because it's Dr. such and such. And oh my God, he went on and on. It was obvious that it was because this was a woman. And so I went around the house and I said to the women in the legislature, I said, whoever gets the next opportunity to introduce the doctor of the day, you go in and you talk about what a good looking guy is and how you all want to go and okay, so we agreed to do that. Well, then I decided that one day we should all wear purple. So I gave everybody so when you come back to the house on Monday or Tuesday, whatever, wear purple. So we all wore purple. Well, it took the guys a while to figure it out. And then they began to notice that we were all dressed alike, and they thought, what's going on? What's going on? I mean, I would do these things to kind of get them shaken up a little bit. Then one day, one of them, we were voting on something, and one of the guys missed the vote. And so he raised his hand and said, Mr. Speaker, I'm so sorry. I was distracted by Representative so she's got this beautiful red dress on. I thought, oh, give me a break. I can't remember whether he let him vote or not. But so I went back to my desk and said, raised my hand about something. And I said, Mr. Speaker, my desk mate has the most beautiful seersucker suit on, and he's got this red rose in his lapel, and I just can't concentrate on anything. But I would say things like that in a trying to be kind of funny, but also trying to make the point to these guys that, you know, what you're saying is just so ridiculous. You know, you're beat anyway. But that was the way I dealt with things a lot. And then I would take notes, and I still have these notes. When people would get up and say these ridiculous things, I would write them down. And so I should really find that list of
that sounds like a book. That sounds like it would be a great book of just like little anecdotes.
I'd like to say, Candy, that I just so admired when I listened to your oral history, your ability to use humor. I just thought it's such a gift to be able to help people laugh at themselves and see their foolishness rather than, you know, kick them in the shin. And it made me think too of Connie Myers' oral history. I knew Dr. Myers and I know her daughter. And one of the things I started thinking about there was that whole trope of the angry woman. She had such a hard time pursuing her lawsuit, and she had every single right in the world to be angry about the years that were taken away from her. And I have an informally adopted daughter who was working for a think tank and is now, and she's young and successful. She's under 30. She's now at the Washington Post, and she calls me up just furious about getting slammed for being an angry Black woman. You know, and I just started feeling just not only admiring you, Candy, but feeling really sorry and sad in terms of how Dr. Myers was treated and how that still continues.
Yeah.
One of the other things that struck me, and this was in Candy's interview as well, and I think that I do feel that this always helps, is doing your homework and being prepared, more prepared than men are, so that when you feel like you are representing all women, you know, that people are going to judge you because they're, you know, transferring that onto, you know, all women don't know what they're talking about, or all women are ill-informed. Just, you know, being over-prepared so that no matter what happens, no one can say you don't understand or you're not right or whatever the case may be.
Yeah, that happened a lot too. And when I was on the county council 1,000 years ago, I was, I don't remember how this happened, but I was elected chair of the Administration and Finance Committee, and I would read the budget before it was presented. So I knew what was in the budget. And so the staff person would present the budget, and I would ask these questions, and it was very obvious that the men on the council hadn't even read the information. So, you know, I learned you couldn't be too aggressive, because then they would resent you. So you had to sort of, oh God, it was the pits. But that happened a lot. I remember too one time, and I don't remember what the subject was, but I went to, I guess the county council appeared before the Richland delegation. And I was making the presentation, and Jean Toll was on the delegation, of course. And Jean and I were good buddies. And so I got up and I made this presentation, and they all assumed that because Jean and I were both female, that we thought alike. And in this particular case, we had different views. And, you know, it just floored me that just because we're both female doesn't mean we both think the same way on whatever this particular subject was. But that happened a lot. I also learned that there were times when something was very important, and that I would ask, say, Jim Barber or Jim Levinas or somebody to make the request to the county council, because they would listen to them and not to me. mean, that didn't happen too often, but once in a while in the beginning, I realized that they resented the fact that this woman had this information or had done this research. And so whatever it was, no, they were going to vote against it. But if one of the guys presented it, then that was totally different, and they would accept it and, you know, and vote for it. So it was just, but you know, that was a long time ago, and hopefully things are a little bit better these days, but I don't know.
Well, I would love to hear, you know, any of the other women that that have joined us tonight, you know, your personal experiences in terms of, you know, when you were entering your careers, or, you know, things that you feel like have changed or that haven't changed over the years.
Yeah, I have a little different perspective on this. I was born in Ohio, raised in Pennsylvania, in a very small community, kind of just a little north of the Mason-Dixon line, in a very conservative family. And I ended up at Furman University in 1966, graduated in 1970. And I ran from South Carolina. I loved Furman. I loved my friends. There was so much about South Carolina that I really, really liked. And part of me wanted to stay here. I was a sociology major, so that would have meant I had to be a social worker and really at the bottom of the barrel. So I made up my mind that I was just going to interview for every management training job that I could get, because I knew that I could be taught, I could learn. And I ended up as the first female hired by a major corporation, a major insurance company. And I was one of 2 women and 26 men. So I spent my first 10 weeks, 12 weeks in Hartford, Connecticut with 26 men, 28 people in training. And what I brought with me was kind of a mixed bag of, I knew I was kind of aggressive and outspoken, but I brought with me sort of what came with me from my 4 years at Furman, which I loved, but I knew I didn't fit there, which is why I ran, and I couldn't stay here. And so I have this really love-hate about women here in South Carolina, because part of the strength of the women, and I think, Candy, you just represent that, is this ability, kind of the steel magnolias, to take what you have and take the steel and then put the softness around it to maneuver around kinds of things, which I brought with me. And not as I learned a lot later. I used to call a friend of mine up for Southern consult, you know. So tell me how you would do this, and so there's a strength here that women have that I think is important, and it's part of why I get involved with these things. Is there's a strength that women have that they need to own. It's really important. So that's my story.
I'll share a little bit about my background. I thoroughly enjoyed listening to all of the audios. My parents divorced when I was 4, and my mom only had a high school education. So pretty much he exited the picture. He sent very little support. So my mom raised 5 children on minimum wage in the 60s. So I grew up watching my mom struggle. I forget which interview it was, but where the mom's having to make the choice between which bill is going to be paid and which bill is not. And I'm the 4th out of 5 children, but I was the first one that graduated from high school. And I'm the only one that went to college. And I did that working in a cotton mill on the weekend and going to school during the week. And the path I chose here in the South is a male-dominated path. So I did public accounting. I got hired at Elliott Davis. I was the first woman they'd ever hired that was married and had children. And so, well, at least in the office that I worked in. So I got the question about what are you going to do when your child is sick? What kind of babysitting arrangements do you have? And I mean, this was in the early 80s, so it's really not that long ago. And then I moved into manufacturing and was the only, a major international manufacturing firm. I'm the only female in their history that they've ever had in management here in the United States. And now I do financial advisory work. I'm a CPA and a certified financial planner. And I didn't really intend to fall into a certain niche, but a lot of my clients are widows and divorced women here in the area that, you know, they need that detail oriented. And to some of your all's points, I mean, the men are still making the financial decisions. And I've had to really sit down and cry with them and hold their hands. And I keep tissue nearby because they're, you know, so often I'm still surprised that so often they don't know what they have and where it is and who to trust. And I really left the manufacturing world and started all over at the bottom in this world. Mainly, I just feel like it is almost like I consider it my mission field. I forget which woman it was that said, always make sure you can support yourself. But that's what I learned, you know, watching my mom. And even though my mom went through all that, I will tell you all, I got married at a very young age, decided to go to college. My husband was 100% against it. So I registered for school behind his back. Didn't tell him until like the week before I was starting, hey, I'm going to school starting next week. And I remember my mom saying, as tough a life as she has had, she said, Melissa Dawn, one day you're going to come home from school and he's going to be gone. And then what are you going to do? And I just said, well, Mom, you know what? If I come home from school one day and he's gone, at least I'll be able to support myself, because if that's the kind of person he is, I'd probably wind up alone anyway. So that's a little bit about my story. Thank you.
I think that the maternity leave stories were really interesting as well. I was born in the late 70s, and I don't know, and I'll have to ask my mom, I don't know if there were ever, you know, whisperings of we might get sued, but she decided not to go back to work. And she said they kept paying her for the longest time because she was the first, she was in management at the bank, and she was the first woman to ever be in management at the bank, let alone to have a baby. And so she just kept getting checks. After she told them she wasn't coming back, they just kept paying her because they didn't even know what to do. They didn't have a process. I think they probably were afraid that if they stopped paying her and it was not when they were supposed to, that something was going to happen. So it just seems inconceivable that you know, just that long ago that, yeah, it was a really good reminder, I think, to all of us that we've come a long way, and a lot of hard fought work on all of your parts.
Something? Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Hi.
Yes, we can.
Boy, in the 70s when I got to USC, I was doing two different kinds of majors that were totally different. And one was geology and one was literature. So I ended up, let me start with the geology. I had gone the year before to do an independent study in Alaska and came back with 9 hours of credit in anthropology and working in, and I came back and the university geology department hired me. And so that next spring, and I was the only woman in this department. I was the only girl. Nobody knew what my background was, that I had done anything or that I had any skills. And so the geology department got this $1 million grant to go look at what ended up being Valdez. And our grant was to look at, to go and spend the summer on the coast of Alaska, living in tents and on glaciers and being flown into places and dropped where there were bears. And I was the only woman in this crew, in the 2 film crews. And when I got the opportunity to go, one of the guys came up to me and said, "Why do you get to go? You're a woman. You know why they want you to go, because the professor in charge is your boyfriend." And it was like, I was so shocked, because I knew I had the background and information. They didn't know that. They just assumed that I was going to go. So I didn't say anything. I just said, "Well, I'm sorry." He said, "You're keeping my best friend from going. He's not going to get his PhD now. You're going, and you have no right to take his place on this project." So I went and I spent the summer, and I can tell you that it was interesting and it was tough. And, and I worked really, really hard, and I did my work. And when I came back, before I came back, every one of the guys, I was the only woman on that crew, I ended up helping somebody in some way that summer. It solved a lot of problems. They'd never been there. They didn't know what to expect and what was going on. I knew how to go into the villages and talk to people. I could get things done. I could go to the airport and say, "Hey, my friend so-and-so," and it would have been from last summer. He used to have this program, and what I'm very good at is connecting people and finding ways to solve problems through people I know, finding out that. So a lot of things happened just because I was chatty and because I had made a lot of friends, and I knew how to go and find out what somebody really needed and put the pieces together or write a letter or whatever. So every single one of them came to me either before we left or when we got back and apologized and said, "We're really glad you were with us. We're really glad that you were on the trip." And, but it was really hard because it was a matter of, I knew that there was nothing I could say that was going to make them think that I could do this work. If I just said, "I'm strong, I've been there, I know what I'm doing, I'm not going to complain, I'm not going to cook your food, I'm not going to be your secretary, I'm going to do, we're going to bring this data back and it's going to work." That if I'd said that, it wouldn't have done any good. What happened is that they had to see me do it. And it was a matter, I was all of 22 years old. And to prove myself, not complain, fell in the water and just kept going and that kind of thing. And so that was one interesting thing. And then later I was doing this program with some other women, and I found out that nobody was looking at women poets and women writers in South Carolina in the 70s. The department chairs were all male, and I was lucky enough to do some work with James Dickey and his class and those students. And we started, the women that I worked with started a magazine called Antebellum in the 70s. And I was the poetry, a feature writer and the poetry writer for that magazine. And I guess we ended up having about 6 or 7 issues, and then we all kind of split up. But we were doing the first women's magazine. Vicki Eislinger helped us get it started, and a lot of other people did too. One of our best issues, I think, was one with Jessica Simpkins. And nobody knew, we put her on the cover of a magazine and talked about her and brought her in to do talks and that kind of thing. And so I was fighting hard on the science area and in the English area. And I did an article where I went around the state of South Carolina and found 12 of the best women poets writing in South Carolina, and did an article on them and put their poet, and that was women poets in South Carolina, and wrote their biographies, went to their house, spent 2 days with them sometimes, hung out, wrote with them, talked, came back and wrote this, was half of the magazine, wrote this piece. And these were women that were doing amazing things in South Carolina, writing and getting acknowledged other places, or, and it opened up for us to be able to get a grant at from Furman University and bring in like 300 people, 500 people for 2 days to come and listen to these women speak. And it was the first time there had been an all women's poetry slam in the 70s, one of the first ones I knew of. But the thing is we didn't think it was remarkable, honestly. We were just doing our thing, cruising along and going, oh, we can do that. We figured out how to do that. And anyway, we split. I ended up going to Houston, but about the pants is really funny. I got a job at Houston Baptist University as a media specialist. I know y'all think I keep changing professions. Don't even ask me what I'm doing now. But so I get this job at this university, and I go in, and one of my jobs is to do multi-image slideshows and climb on rafters and put stuff up and all that. And I get called into the chancellor's office, and he said, Ms. Zinger, you can't wear pants. This is a Christian women's university, and the women do not wear slacks. You're an administrator in the school, and you have to wear a skirt. And I went, do you want me to climb up on a ladder and put lights up in a dress or in a skirt? And he said, well, you could wear a little pair of shorts under your skirt if you want to. But I did what I often do. I just paid no attention to it at all and wore my pants and did my work. You know, it's like, I'm not gonna wander around in a dress trying to do that. But anyway, those are just a few of the things. I came back to South Carolina and have been here fighting the good fight since then, you know, as a mom and doing other things. But it was an interesting time in the arts and in sciences, I thought. We made some progress, and we've fallen back some as well. So
I think we could have a whole evening of just stories about pants.
Who would have ever dreamed about yoga pants all the way back then, right?
Nothing so wonderful as that.
But, you know, and I've been focusing on the slideshow on the women's collections we have. But it's interesting that we find these incredible women's stories in our other collections as well, including the veterans collection, because when we did that project, I consciously said, I want at least 20 to 30% of these interviews to be with women. Women are not going to be silenced when it comes to veterans history. It's really important. They're still breaking barriers every day in the service. And so we got incredible interviews, like with one was a nurse in the Navy, and she was the first unwed mother to serve as a nurse in the Navy. You know, you had other women, another one who worked, I think, for the Coast Guard, and she had to create training manuals for all these officers. And when she went in to look at the materials, they were like, they would have to watch like, not films, but like a slideshow. And she said every third photo was of a scantily clad woman. And she said, why is this in the training manual? And they said, it's the only way we can get the guys to pay attention. So, you know, those are sort of the things that she had to deal with and change when she came in. And, you know, so there's a lot of women in that collection breaking barriers, which is, so we think of our women's collection, but I'm consciously trying to get women's voices into other collections as well, because there are so many stories to tell.
Yeah, women's stories are part of history, not just women's history.
Right.
Well, we want to be respectful of everyone's time. This has been such a pleasure. These interviews were such a pleasure. Andrea, you were such a pleasure, and it was so much fun to see you as an interviewer and the way that you're able to draw these stories out. Thank you, everyone who shared a story tonight. Thank you again for everything that you've done. You know, my contemporaries as well as the women who came before us. All the little things that we're doing hopefully are chipping away at you know, increasing the equality for women in South Carolina and across our country and around the world. So thank you so much. We hope that you will join us. It looks like Claudia is still with us. We are going to feature her new book that comes out in November for November Book Club. We are focusing on voting in October, so we hope you'll join us in October as well. We are really focusing on getting people to fill out their absentee ballots. The registration deadline is coming up in just a few days, but beyond that, we want everyone to understand how important it is to vote, and so we're going to focus on that. So stay tuned to our newsletters, watch us on social media, and we'll have information about the October book club session, as well as Claudia's book that's coming out in November. Her book is Stories of Struggle, the Clash Over Civil Rights in South Carolina. So again, as Andrea mentioned, you know, women's stories are all throughout all different histories through our country, and I think that that's going to be a great example of that, and a really exciting tie-in to someone who has been so important in the feminism movement in South Carolina and in our area. So thank you again. If you enjoyed yourself, please let people know on social media. Our handles are at SC Women Lead on all of the social media platforms. We will be sending out an email tomorrow that'll have a survey, and we really want your honest feedback. Let us know what you liked. If you have other future topics that you'd like us to cover, those surveys really help us guide what we're going to do for future book clubs and our other trainings as well. So we hope that we'll hear from you in that way. Thank you again to Andrea for taking the time to, you know, pull snippets of interviews and give us all this background information and help facilitate the discussion. We'd also like to thank a generous donor who made a gift in honor of Dr. Susan D. Boyd, who many of you know. She's a brilliant woman who always cut her own path. I think that she's another example of feminism in action, and we appreciate that donor for helping make this and other training opportunities for women available, and very generous, and we appreciate it. So thank you again all for attending. Enjoy your evening. It was wonderful to see your faces, and we hope to see you again at other South Carolina Women in Leadership events. Have a great evening.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. You're a great moderator.
Oh, well, thank you. It was, like I said, it was really inspiring to listen to all of those interviews, and I always try to bring a little bit of all those things that I hear into things that I'm doing. So we appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah.
Have a good evening.
Bye-bye.
Bye.